They said he wouldn't last a week. The gym owner had actually laughed out loud when Marcus Cole walked through the door in a faded t-shirt with a baby monitor clipped to his gym bag, asking if he could train during the hours his daughter was at preschool. 3 weeks later, that same gym owner would watch Marcus put a nationally ranked professional fighter flat on his back in under 10 seconds, and the laughter in that room would turn into a silence so complete you could hear the ceiling fan spinning. If this story about second chances and quiet strength speaks to you, hit like, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Marcus hadn't always been a man people underestimated. 10 years earlier, he'd been climbing the ranks in regional MMA circuits, a wiry welterweight with fast hands and a chin that could take a beating and keep moving forward. Then his wife, Elena, got sick, and everything he'd built started slipping through his fingers like sand. He stepped away from competition to care for her, working odd jobs at night so he could sit by her hospital bed during the day. When she passed, he was left with a 2-year-old daughter named Sophie, a stack of medical bills he'd spent years paying off, and a body that remembered how to fight but a heart that had lost all interest in doing so. He moved to a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, where nobody knew his name or his history, and he built a quiet life. He worked as a mechanic during the day, picked Sophie up from preschool every afternoon at exactly 3:15, and spent his evenings teaching her how to read, how to ride a bike, how to believe that the world was still a good place despite what it had taken from them. He didn't talk about fighting. He didn't talk about the man he used to be. As far as anyone in town knew, Marcus Cole was just a single dad who kept to himself, wore grease-stained coveralls, and had a gentle, tired kindness in his eyes that made mothers at the preschool pity him a little, though none of them ever said so to his face. The trouble started at Iron Forge Gym, a mixed martial arts training center that had opened up 2 years prior and quickly became the pride of the town, mostly because it was owned by a former semi-pro fighter named Dale Whitfield who liked to remind everyone of his glory days a little too often. Marcus started going there not to fight, but to stay in shape, using the early morning slot before his shift at the garage, when the gym was nearly empty except for a few night shift workers finishing their sessions. He kept to the heavy bag in the corner, wrapped his hands quietly, and never asked anyone to spar. But gyms are small worlds, and small worlds gossip. Someone noticed the way Marcus moved, the economy in his footwork, the way his shoulders dropped a half-inch before every combination like a man who'd done this 10,000 times before. Word got around that the quiet mechanic with the kid might have a past, and Dale, ever the showman, decided to test it in front of a crowd. He didn't do it kindly. One Saturday morning, when the gym was packed with regulars and a few new members watching an amateur sparring session, Dale called Marcus out from the corner, loud enough for everyone to hear, asking if the single dad wanted to show them what he had, since he clearly thought he was too good to spar with the rest of them. Marcus tried to decline. He said he was just there to train, that he had to pick up his daughter soon, that he wasn't interested in proving anything to anyone. But Dale kept pushing, and some of the younger guys started laughing, not cruelly at first, just the easy laughter of young men who assumed the tired-looking father in the corner posed no threat to their egos. Someone made a joke about diaper changes being his real sparring practice. Someone else asked if his cornerman was a stroller. Marcus absorbed it the way he'd absorbed grief for years, quietly, without flinching, because he'd learned that the things that truly hurt you are never the things people say to your face. He might have let it go entirely if it weren't for what happened next. His daughter Sophie, then 6 years old, had been dropped off early at the gym's small daycare room by a neighbor who was running late, and she wandered out just in time to hear a group of grown men mocking her father. She didn't understand all of the words, but she understood the tone, the way children always do, and her small face crumpled in confusion and hurt as she looked up at her dad, waiting for him to tell her it wasn't true, that daddy wasn't something to be laughed at. That was the moment something in Marcus shifted, not out of anger, but out of a father's fierce, quiet need to make sure his daughter never doubted him. He walked to the edge of the mat, and for the first time in nearly a decade, he asked to spar. Dale grinned and gestured toward a man standing near the water cooler, a broad-shouldered fighter named Victor Reyes who had recently signed with a major promotion and was in town visiting family, using Iron Forge to keep his training sharp before a title eliminator bout. Victor was ranked, dangerous, and easily twice Marcus's current training weight in muscle mass built over years of full-time professional camps. The room buzzed with a kind of gleeful anticipation, the sense that they were about to witness a public humiliation, the kind of story that gets retold at the bar for months. Marcus asked only one thing before stepping onto the mat, that Sophie be walked back into the daycare room so she wouldn't watch. Someone obliged. Then he turned back to face Victor, rolled his neck once, and settled into a stance that made a few of the older gym members go quiet, because stances like that aren't taught in 6 months of casual classes. They're carved into a body over years of sacrifice. The fight, if you could call 10 seconds a fight, was almost too fast for most of the room to process. Victor came forward with the confidence of a man who outweighed his opponent and had nothing to prove, throwing a probing jab that Marcus slipped with a small, economical movement of his head, the kind of defensive reflex that can't be faked. Before Victor could reset, Marcus closed the distance, caught a leg kick attempt, and used the very momentum of Victor's own aggression against him, sweeping him to the mat with a technique so clean it looked almost gentle, before locking in a control position that left absolutely no doubt about who held power in that exchange. He didn't finish with a strike. He didn't need to. He simply held Victor there for a breath, long enough for everyone in the room to understand completely, and then released him and stepped back, offering a hand to help him up. The silence afterward was heavier than the laughter had been. Victor, to his credit, stood up, looked Marcus over with new eyes, and asked quietly who he used to be. When Marcus said his name, a couple of the older fight fans in the room actually gasped, because they remembered watching him fight nearly a decade ago on regional cards, remembered the promise everyone said he had before he simply vanished from the sport without explanation. Dale, who moments earlier had been laughing loudest, stood frozen near the mat with an expression somewhere between disbelief and shame. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't lecture anyone about respect or judgment or the danger of underestimating people. He simply walked to the daycare room, picked up his daughter, knelt down to her level, and told her that everything was okay, that sometimes people say unkind things because they don't understand, and that the only opinion that ever really mattered was the one you held of yourself. Sophie, still too young to fully grasp what had happened on the mat behind her, only knew that her father's voice was steady and warm, and that was enough to dry her tears. Word of what happened spread through the gym and then the town within days, not as gossip this time, but as something closer to reverence. People who had once pitied the tired single dad in the corner began greeting him differently, with a kind of respectful curiosity, asking about his past, asking if he'd ever consider teaching. Dale, humbled in a way that clearly cost his pride more than he'd admit, personally apologized and offered Marcus a position running a small fundamentals class for beginners, an offer Marcus initially declined out of habit before eventually accepting, mostly because it meant he could bring Sophie along after preschool and let her do her homework at a table near the mats while he taught. Over the following months, that small class grew into something the whole gym looked forward to, not because Marcus taught flashy techniques, but because he taught patience, discipline, and the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need an audience to be real. Parents started bringing their kids specifically to train under him. Grown men who had laughed at him weeks earlier now stayed after their own sessions just to watch him work with beginners, taking mental notes on a level of technical mastery they hadn't expected to find in their small-town gym. What people slowly came to understand about Marcus wasn't just that he used to be a talented fighter, but that he had walked away from everything he'd built at the height of his potential to be there for the people who needed him most, and that kind of sacrifice, they realized, took a strength far greater than anything measured in a cage. The single dad they'd once dismissed as unremarkable turned out to be the strongest person many of them had ever met, not because of what he did in 10 seconds on that mat, but because of the 10 years of quiet devotion that came before it. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that the quiet ones are often carrying the heaviest weight with the most grace, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder today that strength doesn't always look the way we expect it to. And before we go, I want to ask you something special. Comment the word respect below if you believe every single parent out there deserves to be seen for the quiet battles they fight every single day, long before anyone ever sees what they're truly capable of. Marcus never returned to professional competition. He didn't need to. He'd already won the only fight that ever really mattered, the one to give his daughter a life full of steadiness, love, and a father who never had to raise his voice, or his fists, to prove exactly who he was.